The water was rushing faster than I had ever seen it. Karen Whitfield stood at her back door, her face pale as white marble, watching her perfectly manicured lawn disappear under 3 feet of muddy river water. Her expensive patio furniture floated past like driftwood. The same woman who had stolen my dock rights just 6 months earlier was now screaming into her phone about flood damage and insurance claims. But this was not a natural disaster. This was justice. You see, Karen thought she could use her HOA power to control every drop of water in our neighborhood. She thought she could lock me out of my own property and force me to pay her extortion fees. She was wrong, dead wrong. What she did not know was that I am a civil engineer. And when you mess with an engineer's water rights, sometimes the water finds a new way home. That is when I realized Karen had no idea what was coming next. 5 years. That is how long I saved every penny to buy my dream home on Willow Creek. The realtor called it a steal at $400,000, but I called it destiny. The property came with something most houses do not have: historic dock rights dating back to 1952. The previous owner's grandfather had built that wooden dock with his own hands, and the legal documents were crystal clear. I owned exclusive access to that stretch of water. My morning routine was sacred. Coffee at sunrise, bare feet on weathered wood, fishing line disappearing into the gentle current. The creek moved like liquid glass, carrying away the stress of 60-hour work weeks and city traffic. This was my sanctuary, my slice of peace in a world gone mad. The neighborhood felt like stepping back in time. Kids rode bikes without helmets. Neighbors waved from their porches. Property lines were respected, and everyone minded their own business. The Hendersons next door brought me fresh tomatoes from their garden. Old Mr. Peterson across the street always stopped to chat about the weather and the fish that were biting. For 2 blissful years, this was paradise. Then the HOA moved in like a plague. It started with letters in fancy envelopes. Willow Creek Community Enhancement Initiative. They promised better roads, improved landscaping, and community standards that would boost everyone's property values. Most neighbors signed up without reading the fine print. I should have paid more attention to what we were really agreeing to. That Tuesday morning changed everything. I walked toward my dock carrying my favorite fishing rod and a fresh cup of coffee, ready for my daily meditation by the water. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. A 6-foot-tall chain-link gate blocked my path. A thick padlock hung from the latch like a middle finger pointed directly at me. My heart pounded as I read the official notice zip tied to the fence. Community Waterfront Management Area. Access restricted to permit holders only. Monthly permit fee $500. Contact HOA Board for applications. $500 every month to access my own property. My hands shook as I reread the notice 3 times. This had to be a mistake, some administrative error that would be cleared up with a simple phone call. I own the dock rights. The deed was filed at the county courthouse. This was impossible. But the gate was real, the lock was real, and the fishing rod in my hands suddenly felt heavy as lead. I stood there for 20 minutes, staring through the chain link at my dock, the same dock where I had proposed to my wife 3 years earlier, the same dock where I scattered my father's ashes last spring, the same dock that legally belonged to me and no one else. The coffee grew cold in my hands. The sun climbed higher, but I felt only darkness. This was not about money. $500 a month would hurt, but I could afford it. This was about something deeper, something that made my blood boil and my vision blur with rage. This was about theft. Plain and simple theft dressed up in legal language and community improvement bullshit. I walked back to my house in a daze, my morning routine shattered like glass on concrete. But as I reached my front door, something hardened inside my chest. A cold determination I had not felt since my army days. They wanted a fight. They were about to get one they would never forget. Karen Whitfield looked like she was born to run an HOA. Perfectly styled silver hair, pressed blazer, and the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. She had been a real estate agent for 30 years before retirement, which meant she knew exactly how to twist legal language into a weapon. The community center smelled like stale coffee and disappointment when I walked into my first HOA meeting. 20 folding chairs faced a long table where Karen sat flanked by 4 other board members who looked like they had been carved from the same block of suburban entitlement. "Mr. Johnson," Karen said without looking up from her paperwork, "I understand you have concerns about our new waterfront management policies." I placed my property deed on the table in front of her. "I have dock rights that predate your HOA by 70 years. You have no authority to restrict my access." Karen barely glanced at the document. "Mr. Johnson, when you joined our community, you agreed to abide by all current and future regulations designed to enhance property values and maintain community standards. The waterfront is now managed collectively for the benefit of all residents." "Collectively managed," my voice cracked with disbelief. "You are charging $500 a month. That is not collective anything. That is extortion." The woman sitting next to Karen, who introduced herself as Secretary Janet Mills, cleared her throat. "The fees cover maintenance, insurance, liability, and professional management services. Waterfront access is a privilege, not a right." "Professional management services." I repeated the word slowly. "What exactly does that mean?" Karen's smile widened. "I provide consulting services to ensure proper waterfront utilization and compliance with environmental regulations. My experience in real estate makes me uniquely qualified for this role." I spent the next hour listening to Karen explain how she had systematically conquered every piece of waterfront property in the neighborhood. The Hendersons had been forced to pay or lose access to the boat launch they had used for 15 years. Old Mr. Peterson had surrendered his fishing rights rather than fight a legal battle he could not afford. "You see, Mr. Johnson," Karen continued, "property deeds are just pieces of paper. What matters is enforcement, and the HOA has the power to enforce community standards through fines, liens, and legal action." She slid a thick folder across the table. "This is your violation notice for accessing restricted waterfront areas without proper permits. The fine is $250 per incident. Our security cameras recorded you attempting to use the dock 17 times in the past month." Security cameras. I had not noticed any cameras, but apparently Karen had been watching my every move. "You have 30 days to pay the outstanding fines and submit your permit application, or we will place a lien on your property." Karen's voice carried the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight. "I have dealt with difficult homeowners before, Mr. Johnson. They always pay eventually." Janet Mills nodded enthusiastically. "The lien process is really quite simple. We file the paperwork, and suddenly your house cannot be sold or refinanced until you settle with the HOA. Most people find it easier to just follow the rules." I looked around the room at the other homeowners. Some avoided eye contact. Others nodded along with Karen's threats. These people had been broken, beaten down by a system designed to extract money and crush resistance. "What if I refuse to pay?" I asked. Karen's smile turned predatory. Then you will discover that HOA liens have priority over mortgage liens in this county. We can force a sale to recover our fees and legal costs. I have seen families lose their homes over much smaller amounts. The meeting ended with Karen handing me another folder full of forms, regulations, and fee schedules. As I walked to my car, I noticed Janet Mills updating a spreadsheet on her laptop. Column after column of names, addresses, and dollar amounts. The HOA was not managing a community. They were running a protection racket. That night, I sat at my kitchen table reviewing every document Karen had given me. The language was deliberately complex, full of whereas clauses and legal terminology designed to confuse and intimidate. But I had worked with municipal contracts for 15 years. I knew legal bullshit when I saw it. By midnight, the truth was clear. Karen Whitfield was not managing anything. She was stealing, and she had been getting away with it because no one had the knowledge or resources to fight back. Until now. The law office of Patterson, Blake and Associates cost me $300 an hour, but Thomas Patterson was the best property rights attorney in the county. His gray beard and wire-rimmed glasses gave him the look of a man who had spent decades fighting bureaucratic nonsense. "Your dock rights are ironclad," Patterson said after reviewing my deed and the original 1952 survey documents. "The HOA has absolutely no legal authority to restrict your access or charge fees for something you already own." Relief flooded through me like warm sunshine, so I can just ignore their demands. Patterson's expression darkened. "That is where this gets complicated. While they have no legal right to restrict your access, they do have the power to make your life miserable through harassment, frivolous litigation, and administrative warfare. Fighting them could cost you $50,000 in legal fees and take 3 years to resolve." 3 years, $50,000. Karen knew exactly what she was doing. "What she is counting on," Patterson continued, "is that you will find it cheaper and easier to just pay the extortion rather than fight. Most people do." I left the law office with a clear understanding of my rights and an equally clear understanding that being right and winning were two very different things. Karen had built a system designed to exhaust her victims financially and emotionally until they surrendered. But she had never dealt with someone like me. The harassment started the next morning. A citation for a trash can place 2 feet outside the designated collection zone. A violation notice for grass that was allegedly 3 inches too tall in one corner of my yard. A formal complaint about my car being parked in my own driveway at an angle that violated the aesthetic vehicle positioning standards. Each violation carried a $50 fine and a deadline for compliance. Karen was death by 1,000 paper cuts, designed to wear me down through constant administrative aggression. Then I discovered something interesting. The HOA had scheduled an emergency vote to expand their waterfront authority during normal business hours on a Wednesday afternoon. The meeting notice was buried in the monthly newsletter between advertisements for lawn care services and recipes for apple pie. Only 7 homeowners attended the meeting, 7 people voting to restrict the property rights of over 200 families in the neighborhood. Karen called it community democracy in action. I started keeping detailed records of every interaction, every fee, every threat. That is when I noticed the pattern in the HOA financial statements. The waterfront permit fees were being deposited into the general fund, but then transferred to something called Whitfield Consulting Services for professional management. Karen was paying herself, every month, thousands of dollars in consulting fees that had never been approved by the community or disclosed in any public meeting. She was not just stealing dock access, she was stealing money. My investigation revealed that Karen had recruited 3 other retirees to help patrol the waterfront and harass anyone who challenged her authority. They drove around in golf carts wearing bright yellow vests that said, "Community Standards Enforcement." These volunteers had no legal authority whatsoever, but they acted like they owned the entire neighborhood. The final straw came on a Saturday morning. I was mowing my lawn when Corinne appeared at my front door with a clipboard and a smug expression. "Mr. Johnson, I need to inform you that continued violation of HOA regulations will result in a lien being placed on your property next Friday. The total amount owed, including fines, fees, and administrative costs, is now $4,750. $4,750 for accessing my own dock. You know what I think about your threats, Corinne." Her smile never wavered. "I think you will pay just like everyone else, because the alternative is losing your house, and I have never met a homeowner willing to go that far over something as trivial as fishing rights." That night, I sat in my home office staring at survey maps and engineering drawings until 3 in the morning. The legal system was too slow. The costs were too high. Conventional approaches would not work against someone who had corrupted the entire system. But I am not a conventional person. I am a civil engineer with 15 years of experience in municipal water management systems. And I had just remembered something very interesting about the history of Willow Creek. Something that would turn Corinne Whitfield's world upside down. My basement office looked like a war room by 3 a.m. Survey maps covered every surface, held down by coffee mugs and engineering textbooks. I had been awake for 22 hours straight, but my mind was racing with possibilities that I had never considered before. The breakthrough came when I found the original 1847 territorial survey in the county historical archives. Willow Creek had not always followed its current path. The river had been artificially redirected in 1974 to accommodate the Riverside Gardens subdivision development. The original channel ran nearly half a mile to the south, following a natural depression that would take it directly behind Corinne Whitfield's house. I cross-referenced the old maps with modern property surveys and felt my heart rate spike. The original river channel cut through the backyards of Corinne's house and 2 other HOA board members. If the creek were restored to its historical path, their properties would become unwilling waterfront real estate. My civil engineering background had taught me that water always seeks the most efficient path downhill. The 1974 diversion had created an artificial channel that required constant maintenance to prevent erosion and flooding. The original path was actually more stable from an engineering perspective. More importantly, I discovered that environmental restoration laws allowed for the correction of historically altered waterways back to their natural pre-development state. Under the Federal Water Quality Act and state environmental regulations, restoring a river to its original channel was not only legal but encouraged. I spent the next week researching water rights law and environmental restoration precedents. The legal framework was incredibly favorable for projects that restored natural water flow patterns. Federal and state agencies actually provided grants and technical support for qualified restoration projects. The more I researched, the more excited I became. This was not revenge. This was environmental restoration with the added benefit of poetic justice. I calculated flow rates, soil displacement volumes, and environmental impact assessments. The project would require redirecting approximately 12,000 gallons per minute of water flow through controlled excavation and strategic damming. Complex, but entirely feasible with the right equipment and expertise. The new channel would flow within 50 feet of my property line, creating natural dock access that completely bypassed the HOA-controlled waterfront. Karen's gate would become irrelevant overnight. But the real beauty of the plan was in the location of the original channel. The historical river path ran directly behind Karen's house, less than 30 feet from her back door. Her perfect suburban lawn would become a riverbank whether she liked it or not. I contacted Morrison Engineering Solutions, a firm that specialized in environmental restoration projects. Jim Morrison was a gruff former Army Corps of Engineers officer who had managed river restoration projects across 3 states. Restoring Willow Creek to its original path, Morrison studied the historical surveys with professional interest. Hell, that makes sense from every angle. The current channel is unstable and requires constant maintenance. The original path follows natural drainage patterns and would be self-sustaining. He quoted me a price of $85,000 for the complete restoration project, including permits, environmental impact studies, and specialized excavation equipment. The money would come from my retirement savings, but the thought of Karen's reaction made every penny worth it. "How long would a project like this take?" I asked. Morrison scratched his beard thoughtfully. "With proper permits and equipment, we could complete the primary excavation in 4 days. Another week for final grading and erosion control. The water would start flowing through the new channel immediately once we break through the connection points. 4 days to change the geography of the entire neighborhood. 4 days to give Karen Whitfield a taste of her own medicine. When can we start?" Morrison pulled out his calendar. "Permit applications take 60 to 90 days for approval, but I noticed something interesting in these surveys. Your property sits at the headwater connection point for the original channel. If you wanted to start with preliminary excavation on your own land while we wait for permits, that would be perfectly legal." I made the decision that night while standing at my kitchen window, looking across the dark creek toward Karen's house. She had used her knowledge of real estate law to steal from my neighbors. She had weaponized bureaucracy against honest homeowners who lacked the resources to fight back. Now it was my turn to use my expertise. Environmental restoration, historic waterway correction, returning nature to its intended state. Karen Whitfield had no idea what was coming, but in 3 months she would discover that water always finds a way home. The permit approval letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, and I felt like a kid on Christmas morning. 87 days of paperwork, environmental impact studies, and bureaucratic review had finally paid off. The State Environmental Protection Agency had granted full approval for the Willow Creek Historical Channel Restoration Project. Morrison's crew arrived at 6 a.m. on the first day of excavation, and the site was magnificent. 2 massive excavators, a bulldozer, specialized drilling equipment, and a crew of 8 men who looked like they could move mountains, which was essentially what we were about to do. I had timed the project perfectly. Karen was in Florida visiting her sister for 2 weeks, which meant she could not rally her HOA cronies to create problems or file last-minute injunctions. By the time she returned, the new river channel would be a fait accompli. The sound of heavy machinery echoed through the quiet neighborhood as Morrison's crew began cutting the new channel from the headwater connection point near my property. The excavators moved with precision, following the GPS coordinates from the 1847 territorial survey down to the inch. Neighbors gathered on their porches and sidewalks, watching with fascination as massive amounts of earth were moved and shaped. Most of them had no idea what was happening, but they could sense that something extraordinary was taking place. "What exactly are you building over there?" asked Sarah Henderson, my next-door neighbor, as she watched the bulldozer reshape the landscape behind her house. "Environmental restoration project," I replied with a straight face. "Returning Willow Creek to its original historical path. The state approved it last month." The first day focused on excavating the main channel from my property south toward the original connection point. 12 hours of continuous digging created a deep trench that would soon carry thousands of gallons of rushing water past Karen's back door. Day 2 brought the controlled explosions. Morrison used shaped charges to break through the limestone bedrock that had been blocking the original channel for over a century. The sound echoed through the neighborhood like thunder, and I watched with satisfaction as rubble and dirt cleared the final obstacles to water flow. Janet Mills, Karen's HOA secretary, appeared at my fence line with a clipboard and a concerned expression. "Mr. Johnson, I need to inform you that this construction project was not approved by the HOA Architectural Review Committee. You are in violation of several community standards." I handed her a copy of the state environmental permit. "Federal and state environmental law supersedes HOA regulations, Janet. This is a legally mandated restoration project." She studied the document with growing alarm. "But this shows the new river channel running behind Karen's house. That cannot be right. That is where the creek flowed for thousands of years before development altered the natural drainage pattern. We are simply correcting an historical mistake." Janet's face went pale as she realized the implications. She hurried away, probably to call Karen in Florida with the news that her perfectly manicured backyard was about to become waterfront property. Day 3 brought the moment I had been waiting for. Morrison positioned his crew at the connection points, where the new channel would join the existing creek upstream and downstream. Strategic damming had already redirected most of the water flow, but now we were ready to break through and let nature reclaim its original path. "You ready for this?" Morrison asked with a grin. "Once we connect these channels, there is no going back." I nodded. "Do it." The final explosions were smaller but more dramatic. Water immediately began flowing through the new channel, slowly at first, then building to a steady current as the creek found its natural path downhill. Within hours, thousands of gallons per minute were flowing past my property through the restored historical channel. The new river ran clear and clean, following the ancient path that had been carved by centuries of natural water flow. I watched with deep satisfaction as the current moved past my land, creating perfect dock access that no HOA could ever control. By day 4, the restoration was complete. The old artificial channel had been partially filled and would eventually dry up completely. Willow Creek was flowing where nature had always intended it to flow. I was sitting on my new dock, enjoying a cup of coffee and watching the water when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Karen's number. "You son of a bitch," she screamed before I could say hello. "What have you done to my property?" I looked across the water toward her house, where I could see her standing in what used to be her backyard. The new river channel ran less than 20 feet from her back door. "I restored Willow Creek to its historical path, Karen, just like nature intended." "This is not over, Johnson. I will sue you for everything you own." "Good luck with that," I replied calmly. Everything was done with full state and federal approval. I have the permits right here. The line went dead, but the creek kept flowing, carrying my problems away downstream. The first heavy rain came 3 days after Karen returned from Florida, and it was glorious. I watched from my kitchen window as the restored creek swelled with runoff, carrying away months of accumulated anger and frustration. But the real show was happening across the water at Karen's house. Her basement had flooded within hours. The perfectly level lawn that had never seen standing water was now a muddy swamp dotted with floating patio furniture. Her expensive outdoor kitchen had been relocated to the neighbor's yard by the current, and her prized rose garden looked like a war zone. Karen stood in her back door at 7 a.m., still wearing a bathrobe, screaming into her phone. I could not hear the words, but her body language told the whole story. Pure panic mixed with the kind of rage that comes from having your world turned upside down without warning. The emergency HOA meeting was called for that same evening, and I would not have missed it for anything. The community center was packed with homeowners who had heard rumors about the river project but wanted to understand what had actually happened. Karen arrived 15 minutes late, her usually perfect hair disheveled and her blazer wrinkled. She looked like she had not slept in days, which was probably true given that her basement had been steadily filling with creek water. This meeting is about the illegal destruction of private property by one of our residents, Karen announced, pointing directly at me. Mr. Johnson has deliberately flooded several homes and destroyed thousands of dollars in landscaping without permission or proper notification. The room buzzed with confused conversations as neighbors tried to understand what was happening. I stood up slowly, holding a thick folder of documents. I have conducted a legal environmental restoration project with full state and federal approval, I said in a calm, professional voice. Willow Creek has been returned to its historical natural path, correcting 70 years of artificial diversion that was environmentally damaging and geologically unstable. I placed copies of the environmental permits, historical surveys, and restoration documentation on the front table. Everything was done by the book, with proper oversight and professional engineering. Karen's face flushed red with fury. You deliberately flooded my house. This was not environmental restoration, this was personal revenge. The restoration followed the exact path documented in the 1847 Territorial Survey, I replied. If your house happens to be located in the historical flood plain of Willow Creek, that is not my responsibility. That is a consequence of building in an area where water naturally flows. Janet Mills stood up, clutching her laptop. The HOA demands that you immediately restore the creek to its previous path and compensate affected homeowners for property damage. I smiled for the first time in months. The HOA has no authority over federally approved environmental restoration projects. You might as well demand that I stop gravity or reverse the rotation of the earth. The meeting descended into chaos as affected homeowners demanded answers and unaffected neighbors asked why they had not been informed about the project. Through it all, I sat quietly, watching Karen's carefully constructed authority crumble like a sandcastle at high tide. The best moment came when Tom Peterson, whose fishing rights had been stolen by Karen's permit scheme, stood up and started clapping. This is the best thing that has happened to this neighborhood in years. Karen, you got exactly what you deserved. Within minutes, half the room was applauding. These were people who had been bullied, harassed, and extorted by Karen's corrupt system. They were celebrating their liberation. Karen tried to regain control, but her voice was drowned out by the noise. She finally gathered her papers and stormed out, followed by her remaining supporters. The next morning brought even better news. Karen's insurance company had denied her flood damage claim because her property had not been previously designated as flood-prone. Apparently, insurance companies do not cover damage from acts of God and natural water flow patterns. I was enjoying my morning coffee on my new dock when I saw the contractors arrive at Karen's house. A crew of men in work boots carrying pumps, fans, and demolition equipment. The cleanup and restoration would cost her tens of thousands of dollars, all out of her own pocket. Across the neighborhood, other homeowners were discovering that their dock access problems had been solved overnight. The new creek channel bypassed Karen's controlled waterfront entirely, giving everyone natural access that no HOA could regulate or monetize. My phone rang constantly with neighbors thanking me for what I had done. The Hendersons invited me over for dinner. Old Mr. Peterson brought me a bottle of whiskey and a handshake that said more than words ever could. Justice tastes sweeter than honey when you have waited this long to savor it. Karen Whitfield resigned from the HOA board on a Thursday morning in disgrace, her letter of resignation consisting of 2 sentences and 0 apologies. The other board members voted to accept her resignation unanimously, desperate to distance themselves from the woman who had turned their quiet neighborhood into a battleground. My new morning routine was everything I had dreamed it would be. Coffee at sunrise, bare feet on the new dock, watching the clear water flow past carrying away the last traces of Karen's tyranny. But now I had entertainment with my fishing. Across the creek, construction crews worked daily on Karen's flood-damaged house, replacing ruined drywall and installing an expensive flood mitigation system. The transformation of our community was remarkable. Without Karen's iron fist controlling every decision, neighbors began talking to each other again. Children played in yards without fear of citations. Property owners made improvements without begging permission from a corrupt board. The creek itself had become a source of pride rather than conflict. Families brought their children to feed ducks and explore the restored wetlands. The water ran cleaner and clearer than it had in decades, supporting fish populations that had been damaged by the artificial channel. I often reflected on the lessons learned during those dark months of harassment and legal warfare. Sometimes standing up to bullies requires extraordinary measures. Sometimes the system is so corrupt that working within it only enables further abuse. Sometimes you have to be willing to move mountains, or in my case, rivers. The irony was not lost on me that Karen's house had indeed become the most expensive waterfront property in the neighborhood. She now enjoyed unobstructed water views, the gentle sound of flowing creek, and premium flood insurance rates that reflected her new riverfront location. Everything she had tried to control and monetize was now her daily reality, whether she wanted it or not. On quiet evenings, I sometimes saw her standing at her back door, staring across the water toward my dock. I wondered what she was thinking, whether she understood that her downfall had been caused by her own greed and cruelty, whether she regretted the day she decided to steal from her neighbors. But mostly, I did not think about Karen Whitfield at all. To anyone facing similar battles with HOA tyrants and bureaucratic bullies, I offer this advice. Document everything. Know your rights. Understand your unique advantages and expertise. And remember that sometimes the most effective solutions are the ones your enemies never see coming. The creek flows past my dock every morning, carrying away yesterday's troubles and bringing new possibilities with each sunrise. That is the sound of freedom. That is the sound of justice. That is the sound of water finding its way home.